Good morning, everyone. I am Anne Kampf. If my voice sounds a little different today, it's because I'm recovering from the flu. And thank you in advance for your patience. Today's session is titled Creating and Leading Adaptivity. All my LinkedIn live sessions are private, independent projects that I host in my personal capacity. They are created a space for sharing, learning, growing, and connecting. I invite you to write, as always, your comments and questions directly in the LinkedIn comment session as we go. Today, I'm truly glad to welcome Dr. Fiona Kerr. Dr. Kerr is the founder and CEO of the Neurotech Institute and Focus Consulting in Australia, globally recognized for her work on the neurophysiology of interaction and proximity between humans and with technology. Dr. Kerr combines qualifications in cognitive science, systems engineering, psychology, and anthropology with over 40 years in industry to consult on contemporary issues such as building and leading flourishing human systems, adaptive organizations, how virtual versus proximal interaction impacts trust and decision making, leading hybrid organizations and creating human tech partnerships that maximize the unique capabilities of both. Dr. Kerr advises a broad international list of clients across government and corporate sectors from healthcare, law, and robotics to defense and Cirque du Soleil. She holds academic roles in Australia and overseas, speaks globally, and is a fellow of the Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. Fiona, welcome. I'm really
Thank
honored
you.
that you accepted my invitation.
I'm delighted too.
Let's um, let's kick it off. I would say I am always curious about what people see before they have words for it. That first noticing that often reveals structural sensitivity. Before you had the language of complexity, what did you notice in organizations that others seem to miss?
I noticed that people weren't really looking what at the fact that you get what you reward. So there was a lot of discussion about wasn't working, what was going wrong, what as I got more and more senior, what was being done and it wasn't being taken up, and it was a case of not flipping over to the other side and saying, well, whatever we're seeing, we reward. So what are we actually rewarding? And what are those hidden interconnections? So I guess I always thought like that. What is driving this in ways that we can't see? And what is the impact of that? And how do we figure that out? And how do we change them?
Oh, we lost your connection, your audio.
Am I back now?
Yes. Yes. Yes, we
Oh
can hear
dear, I
you.
hope
Yeah.
we're not going to keep doing that. Oh,
No
good.
worries. In live sessions, it happens.
And I guess that sorry, yes. And the other thing, I guess, because in the beginning I was often in organizations where it was pretty well all male, and at the time I wasn't an engineer, I was actually an anthropologist when I was in things like power generation and mining. So they didn't really know what to do with me or what I did. And I ended up in industrial relations. And so much of that was really watching the impact of, trust. So organizations that worked well, they seemed to be very aware, the management and the leadership seemed to be very aware that trust was something very robust and important. It wasn't just fluffy. So yeah, that was another thing that was brought home very often to me.
Very interesting. What question about leadership stayed unsolved for you long enough that it pulled you into a PhD?
By the time I was 50, I'd run my own company for a number of years, but I'd also been in a few different kinds of companies around the world, often, from General Motors to pharmaceuticals to those kind of companies, and at higher and higher levels myself as well. And then working with really good CEOs in organizations where either there was a problem or they were going well but they wanted to improve. So I would embed for between 1 and 3 years, and we would work on that kind of flourishing organization and how to make it more adaptive. And so I had a number of really good case studies and some on what you do not do, but a lot, sort of a various amount of case studies on the fact that these people built really adaptive systems. They built structures that allowed for adaptivity and connection and thinking together, but they also had structures and rules and those kind of things, but they had them in the right way and in the right places, and they blocked the right things but let the other things through. So that was really interesting. And the other side to me was, so I thought, okay, I'll go back and have a look at how you build complex, adaptive, human, co-evolving systems, which meant engineering. And then about sort of a year into that, it was fascinating. It's such a beautiful thing to look at. But then it was, well, why do those leaders think like that? Why do they think differently? Why do they build those, those systems that allow emergence and that they allow kind of that movement in all kinds of ways, and others don't? So I got really interested in, well, how do they think? Have they got different brains? It turned out, yes, they've actually got different structures around how they think and what they need. So that was it. I was hooked, and I did the PhD and kind of combined both of them.
I understand perfectly, and it's a very, very good explanation, very beautiful explanation why you why it pulled you into the PhD. When leaders say we need to adapt, what do you hear that tells you whether they actually understand what that means?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I guess I learnt over time. It was almost like it was sort of self-choosing, because I would be asked to go in, and often it was, they'd already come to a decision, because that's a very common thing. They come to a decision about what's wrong and what the solution is, and then they ask you to come in to put it in place to help them. And that's fine. So I would go in and I would say, okay, so what do you actually want at the end? And they'd say, well, we want this, we want X. And I'd say, all right, so you're doing A to get X. If you do A, you'll get B and C. But if you want X, you're going to have to do, R, S, T, and O, and it will take you maybe 1 to 3 years instead of 6 months. So if you want to do this one, that's great. Someone can do it with you. It's not going to get you what you want. It'll get you these things over here. But if you actually really want to do X, it's fascinating and we can do it, but it's a different path. And quite quickly, you kind of differentiate out the, I guess, to be harsh, the box tickers, or the more kind of linear thinkers that just want to do that and get it done, and then say, well, I've tried. And the people that are really invested in wanting to spend the time and be comfortable with that kind of emergent process that's going to be, that they don't quite know what's going to happen, but they're going to get people through it along with them. Then that's it. You know that you're in, and you know that it's going to be a really interesting process. Not that you don't, disagree and have a great time arguing. I think one of the best CEOs said she probably had argued with me more than anyone else ever, but we were so sort of fond of each other in the end. She was a fantastic CEO.
Many, well, adaptation is frequently declared and less often demonstrated.
Yes.
And as you say, it's a very complex thing to do, adaptation. Um,
Yep.
what is emergent logic pointing to that conventional leadership models don't?
Um, it's probably it's more like an addition. Like I know that there's so many kinds of leadership styles that everyone claims, oh, mine's the right
Mm,
one, everyone else is the wrong one. That used to drive me nuts at university. So I think that the difference for me is there's a group in Finland that talk around systems intelligence, and it's that kind of extra step past systems thinking, which means that you also know that you're within a system as well as being able to be above it and working on it, and that system is both. There's two things. So as someone who can make a decision and make changes in that system, whether you're a senior manager or a leader, you're working on both the structural aspect, building that kind of rule boundary feedback loop structure, but you're also you're managing that sort of two interconnected systems, because you've got that experiential feeling system that is the
mm,
human part of how that works. And intuition is probably one of the biggest differences for me. Like those people who are really tuned in to understanding that how people interact and feel, and are valued and align to the way forward for the organization, and actually sink into that culture and understand the values and share them, that's critical. And it's a really interesting process of building that trust. And the intuition is a really robust skill for those people. Their radar is terrific, and so that's probably one of the differences. And
yeah.
it's not just EQ; it's a lot wider than that.
I assume that also because many conventional models assume predictability, and predictability gives one comfort, and complexity
Yes.
assumes interaction, assumes intuition, empathy. From my perspective, assumes what I call humanity. To treat people like human beings and not like numbers or pieces um, in a mechanical system.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think people that can do that. So all of the leaders, so they all have very clear sense of purpose, which everybody understands. It's easily shared. It doesn't change depending on where you are. And they have very strong values. So the thing I notice with with the kind of emergent logic leaders is that um, they're non-negotiable. So why are we here, and what values are we going to maintain in going forward? Is that's tight. That doesn't alter. And then the other things, they're very comfortable with emergence. They don't have to. I call it steerage rather than control. They're really comfortable with steerage. They understand the difference. If you try and control, all you do is tighten a system up and stop it from being able to move and adapt in real time. But if you steer, then it's something which is much more around trusting and tending, and just watching, listening, being part of it, nudging when you need to, letting people feel comfortable, kind of in stepping into that kind of that next step. It's in systems terms, it's called the next adjacent. It's a beautiful idea of this little step outside what you do now, and then once you're in there, you can take that next little step. And so if people are sort of trust you and then understand why, and know that it's not going to stay the same, but that's all right, it's still safe, then what you end up with is you you know where you're going, and you know that you're going to be supported getting there. So then people will step into that unknown with you, and you can have some agency around, well, what would be if now we know where we're going, let's think together about how we would do that really well. Whereas if you don't have that, then you won't step. You'll maintain where you are. You know, you'll because you won't have that confidence.
Yeah. From my perspective, if you do so, you prepare the structure also for times of pressure. Uh,
Yes.
and that's the most important thing, because otherwise, whatever is going on, when the system will be under load, it will not hold.
Yeah, absolutely. But so that's when you get, I don't know if I'm jumping around, but that's when you get recursion. That's when you get it going back to, um, this kind of inertia. Well, I'm going to actually stay where I am. And that's a really interesting process. There's a number of things that cause that, but it's very much once you don't feel confident. So there's leaders who are good at it. I always try and do it with my teams. Are they they kind of keep they're really good at that kind of band of keeping people not too sort of stressed in there's all this change, and not bored with there's no change, but it's that sort of that lovely kind of middle level where you know that things are going to be different, and you know that you can't just settle in and sort of never ever change. But people don't tend to want to do that anyway if they have a stake in doing something better or learning. But then also know that they can be really confident that that's going to let them grow, and they have agency in that. And that they have a really good understanding about why. So another big difference for me with those people is they spent a long time. Most of their effort was spent on, what is the problem or what is the opportunity. So certainly as an industrial mediator, I constantly was in a situation of trying to stopping strikes and stopping physical issues. And it was a case of stopping, listening, figuring out what is really underneath what they're saying. And so what is it that I can tune into, and understand where they're really going. And so what you've got with people, I've lost my train of thought. I was watching you and I lost my train of thought. Oh dear.
I'm sorry, I'll
Oh,
hide, Fiona. I'll hide. Uh,
oh dear. I
um,
completely lost it.
you're saying that you had to mediate different conflict situations. Um, in your case
Yes.
studies, what most reliably pulls leaders back into control?
Do you mean when they want to use control rather
Yes.
than,
Yeah.
yeah? So what I've noticed is when those people that are uncomfortable with that kind of emerging process, or they're uncomfortable with the skill to be able to take people forward, because that's what I was talking about. If you sorry, thank you. So those people tend to spend 90% of their time selling the solution. So they've looked at it, they've made their mind up. Very often that kind of trying and new ways and failing and coming up with good ideas is all kept at the top, whereas
Mm,
that's a really, really wonderful way to increase complex problem solving all the way down through the organisation. But those organisations don't let that happen. They keep that all at the top. And so they've already decided what the solution is. And so they're really, they spend a lot of time making sure people know what they need to do now. And they will say, well, it's because of this, but this is what we need to do. And people who are good at that, good at not needing to just control it and then tell you where to go, are people who will say, these are this is the problem or this is the opportunity. Let's have a look at what we might do, and which is completely different, because then people will be able to come with you. But that control, that ability to take people through, if they don't feel as comfortable, or if they don't consider it's necessary, then they are you on the bus or under it type of attitude. Then the problem is they tend to tighten up more when people don't come with them or when people resist. Or it might be a case of they're being too nice. They try to keep people out of anxiety and say, no, it's going to really be stable and nothing will change. You can't guarantee that with people either. And people and managers who tell their own management that they must not upset people and they must guarantee people that everything's going to be fine, you've also trapped your manager into that too. So they go back into control because they then go, okay, we need to put more processes and methods around this because people aren't coming and they're resisting, and there's all sorts of there's shadow systems, there's old ways being dragged forward, people aren't doing as much as they need to, so they tighten up more to make it really, right now we're going to make you have to move. And humans have an internal locus of control, which means that as soon as you do that, they don't move. They find every way possible to resist. I could tell you so many stories about working with people when they have made a decision. It's either been a takeover or it's been a badly done, change, and they will so openly make it obvious that they do not agree and that they will not change what they're doing.
Right, because oftentimes whatever is on the paper or the theory sounds very good and it's well structured, but what happens in reality and in the interaction between people says completely something else. And I call this systemic resonance because the field that is created has an impact on all the parties involved. And therefore,
Yes.
the interactions are, like in physics, action and reaction. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And you can't actually, whenever you try and control anything, because certainly with me, when I was in the university doing the PhD, I was also lecturing. I was doing the MBA lectures on creating organizations as complex, adaptive, co-evolving systems, poor things. So they got all of my kind of science as I was going, and it was really interesting watching the ones who just could not get the concept of steerage, and they had a lot of experience, the people in these kind of rooms, and they would talk very much about how they tightened up, and then they were amazed to find that this was happening over here, that they would never have guessed. And so it's really interesting figuring out how you connect that back, and that gets back to what is actually being rewarded here and where are the feedback loops, because they're hidden feedback loops, but they'll come out somewhere. We just won't know where they are. So it's much harder in the end to try and manage it, to try and control it. It really just gets really, really messy and then becomes really brittle and then breaks.
Right. Sometimes what looks like strategic clarity is simply disciplined repetition, because you mentioned the loops.
Yes, absolutely. And it's also, hugely filtered.
What
Yes.
do leaders commonly mistake for being strategic when they are actually reinforcing inertia?
I think that one of the really interesting things around inertia is, well, let's see. So because inertia sits there when when there's a resistance to allow that looseness of adaptivity. And because inertia is partly about wanting to control what's going on, then I guess what I've noticed is what you get. Sorry. I'm trying not to go into other things that you might want me to talk about a bit later. It all kinds of comes together, really, doesn't it, in the same sort of space. Let's see.
I think that success stabilizes identity, and stability can quietly resist to contradiction. And this resistance then allows the inertia to happen and
Yes, I
those
think, yeah,
loops to come.
I think so. I think that when you, I'm just trying to think of what I'm saying. So adaptive systems are really good, and adaptive organizations are really good at being able to pick up weak signals and have kind of resilient people and resilient structures, so that when new information comes in, then it can be recognized, it can be utilized, it can be put into practice, and parts of the system can move. If you've got an organization where the strong signals are the things that are rewarded, and they are the stories about the way that we do things, are the things that are not negotiable, then there's huge resistance to picking up new information, to picking up those weak signals, because strong signals are all those things that we have as our processes and our procedures and our ways of doing things, and we just do it. That's how we do it. And so once you've got that, then you are really not going to be able to get any new information in there. There's no radar, which means there's also no capacity for people who are at the edges of the organization and picking up these changes in the ecosystem that your organization is sitting in, because there's nowhere to put that information. It's not wanted. So then all that happens is you just keep going with what you're doing before, and until eventually, you're just not suited anymore.
So if adaptation depends on perception, then the signal direction becomes leadership work, right?
Can you say that again?
If adaptation depends on perception, because you have to be
Yes.
able to perceive also the weak signals, let's call them like this.
Yes. Yep.
Then signal detection becomes actually leadership work.
Absolutely. The type of leader that is really good at that, the adaptive leader, is the one that not just puts up with what I call disconfirming information. Is that the right information? Have I missed something? They're actively trying to pull it up. They're actively seeking it. They're getting people to understand what it is and to look for it. And then you end up being able to shift power and resources as well to the right places. Because one of the things with organizations in high inertia is that not only have they got these, they've got these kind of really set mental models, and people don't have any faith that you can get adaptation in the organization because they've just seen it fail. And they often can't do it because high inertia organizations shift power and resources to where they want it to stay. And they don't kind of alter it as required as you shift and adapt. But organizations where you're trying to pick up that information, it's really highly sought, and it's qualitative data as well as quantitative, and that it's at all levels. So I've seen and I try, but certainly organizations that are really good at that have a really good litmus test. So how well your organization does this, you can ask yourself 4 or 5 questions. So the first is, in your organization, very often the people that pick up that information, as we've said, are they're either at the coal face, or they're with the clients, or they're in places where they can see some things might be changing. People want something different, something's not working. So the first thing is, are people capable of even picking that up? If they're capable of picking it up, is there a way that they can feed that into the organization? If they can feed it into the organization, can it be picked up formally? Can it actually be captured well? If it's captured well, is it used? Is it acted on? And also something that only, I think, good managers and leaders tend to think about is, if it's acted on, have they closed the loop and gone back to the person or people that have put that information in to say, this was, you helped here, this was part of this? Because if you keep trying to put information into something and you never know if it's making any difference, then people will tend to stop.
Correct.
And so that's really useful all through the organization, is giving them the permission and the capacity to be able to feed that information, to watch, to see what's happening, to react, to feed it in. So that's a massive learning curve. And that, at the beginning, you said, why did I go back to uni? One of the other things I noticed was the organizations with those kind of adaptive leaders, they were better at complex problem solving at every level, like right through the organization. And at first I thought, is it just that they've been given permission to do that? And yes, that's part of it. But the other thing, which I now know, as a neuroscientist, is the more you get practice in dealing with complexity, the more you change the neural networking in your brain to deal with complex problems in a different way. And so they allowed that to happen in those, they deliberately grow that, that capacity to pick up those weak signals and to work on them. And at senior level, they're really good at having qualitative as well as quantitative information on the table being just as relevant. So we could be on a board and we could be sitting talking about a problem. We need really good data. And by that, we need the right things measured in the right ways, which is often not. But then, I would look and I would say, well, Anne, you've been doing this for 20 years. What do you think? What do you think should be done? And what do you think the problems are? Because that massive intuitive wisdom and expertise that you've got is so valuable. And the by far the most strategic adaptive organizations are the ones that are really good at
Oh, we lost you again.
at senior level.
Oh, now it's good.
Did you
now
lose
we
what I
hear
was
you.
saying?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Fiona,
And the other thing
true.
that to help that is,
Yes, please.
just to finish, the other thing that's present at that table is high trust, because when you do that and when you have that information and then you also have critique, because you might have missed something, or you might have an opinion that isn't necessarily right. You're not always going to be perfectly correct. Someone else needs to be able to say, well, what about this? Or I found that. And the high trust level and the invitation for that critique means that you're going to end up, you might have really robust discussions. I've been in so many very robust discussions on boards and executives. But the outcome, because we all respect each other, and so that was what we discussed. We never attacked each other. It was getting in there and really pulling apart that information or that data to make sure, or to try and understand it. And the end was, the other wonderful thing that happens is, whether you call it mental models, whether you call it a shared vision, that aligns when you're doing that. And that work is the work that means that in the end, even though you say we're agreed on what looks good, very often they're not, because when it starts to, as you said it very well earlier, once it's under tension, you could be saying, I want this to happen, but it becomes obvious that they're for quite different reasons. So, you know, having those discussions, those really kind of honest critique kind of discussions with that invited understanding of information, and with respect for that huge intuitive knowledge. So I talk a lot about strategic intuition and intuitive forecasting, and I work on that in Finland, and talk about it, you know, well, everything from CERC to Amex, because it's really critical. Those companies understand just how critical it is to get that out there and use that as well.
Truth rarely enters through formal reporting lines. So I think that what you have said, it's very important. Leaders have to have an ear also um, or for all the people that they are leading, in order to get the best information based also on this intuition that you are speaking about, so that at the end they have they have fulfilled the goal, the company goal, the team goal, whatever is set. And it's very important to know how to give feedback and how to give validation. And there's a difference between feedback and validation.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, feedback is fascinating. And in fact, I use feedback as because feedback changes everything. Feedback is what changes behavior. You know, whether you're training your dog or your child or your husband or whoever, it's you can't understand the situation, and you can't change it in a way that works without getting information back, you know, the right information at the right time in the right way, and from the right people, to be able to take it on board and recognize that. So very often when I'm talking to organizations about difficult conversations or, you know, anything like that, I flip it, and I'll go into, okay, this is actually about how the role of feedback, in anywhere, in your family, in organizations, you know, for people, and just making sure that people get the information they need when they need it, because very often they get it too late. That's the
yeah,
common thing, or they don't get it the way that they need it, or can use it, or not the right people get the right data. So feedback is, you know, the how, what, when, where, why, is in that way it seems pretty simple. But when you think about that, you know, who does need to know this, when and why do they need to know it, and what do they need to know about it, and then, you know, what can they do with it, is really critical. And it completely changes, as someone who's had to deal with the negative conversations a lot, in some roles, that is a very different conversation you start to have. And it also, again, becomes respectful and objective, but it's not that it becomes soft. It becomes often harder at first for people, because you do it with good data, you know,
yeah,
and then they really have to think about it, and they really have to, but it gives them an opportunity, a massive opportunity, to have a look at this beautiful space of possibility, you know, where they might go, and what they might need, and then you've got a really good idea as well of being able to improve it. So it's a win-win.
yeah. Well, systems don't cohere through authority alone. They cohere through shared meaning. Uh,
Yeah.
what conditions allow trust? Because you mentioned trust. So, what conditions allow trust to form uh, quickly in complex environments?
Quickly. This is fascinating, because I work with like first responders, soldiers in the field, those kind of things, and very often they do have to move very quickly. It's easier if you have a group that is stable and knows each other. So,
Mm.
so if we take them first, what's really interesting is, we get into the power of proximity. So one of the things I look at is what happens when you're proximal to another human being, and in fact, spent time looking at the difference between making good complex decisions, high quality complex decisions, with another human proximal to you rather than just something like a trusted autonomous system. And humans are better with other humans. And it's because we make these amazing neurophysiological differences to each other. The emotional trust turns on all kinds of cognitive chemicals and electrical activity that changes logic pathways, that alters the way that we think. So that's probably another discussion, but it's really interesting. And with a group that's stable, that has spent time proximally, they've spent time with each other, they've mapped each other. So they know the strengths and the weaknesses, and they know really well. It's like a jigsaw. They don't have to all try and think of who might fit into what if they have to move quickly. It's all there. So it's amazing because it means that they can be really efficient, really quick at looking at the complex information because they don't have a high cognitive load in trying to figure out that other stuff. So they're just able to have a massive ability, a lot of cognitive room to be able to be situationally aware and strategic. And they share that. So there's something called inter-team synchrony, and it's amazing to watch. You can actually physically watch it. You can put caps on and watch brains do this together.
It's fascinating.
But in general, to go back to your, it is really fascinating. And when you're in high trust organizations, there is a level of that. There's inter-team and chemical synchrony that's happening sort of at a level. So that lovely power of small actions of people being respectful and being connected and being positive and sharing, and also, debating and all those sorts of things really does create that capability to think together quickly and dynamically, because you don't have all that decision making just stuck at the top. So I guess I would talk about respect and trust, and I would also talk about passion. So we get back to that. Do you understand? Do you all have that understanding of that kind of passionate purpose and that sort of values base? So you're very, very clear on that, and then you can spend a lot of your time then on having a look at, all right, so what do we need to know? How do we make sure that we have candor here and we test it? So again, that's that lovely disconfirmation, and being able to take off, because people basically have faith that this will work in the organization. So if people have faith that they can make changes and they do work, then they naturally will step more easily, into dealing with that process. And when you have high trust in an environment that's really moving, the more they have that constant, I guess, ability to be able to share that idea. Physically, you can get neurogenesis across groups. You can get the brain connecting and almost designing a similar kind of roadmap together. So a good example, a story, I guess, example is, if I'm a manager, if I'm the CEO and we have a small organization and we need to change, and I come in and say, and you trust me, right? So I've been all right beforehand. You've been able to rely on me. And I talk about, again, the problem rather than the solution, and start to discuss, these are the things that we need to tackle. So, let's have a look at how we go. If these are the not negotiables that we have to hit, then let's discover how we get there. And it might be bumpy, but we'll get through. And I'm really glad that I've got you as a group that, we're going to do this. It's like pragmatic optimism. That's a really important part of it. So I'm a pragmatic optimist, you trust me, and what happens is your parasympathetic nervous system actually starts to fire, and you put out a chemical, it's BDNF is its short term, which can create new neurons, and you start thinking and ideating about what might be a solution, what might be a way that we have to go forward, and you get a contagion effect in that room where people start doing it together, and so they get that lovely kind of allied mind about where we're going and what we need to do. If I come into that room and I'm saying we need to change and you don't trust me, so perhaps I've said before it's going to be fine and it wasn't, or I've done something and not kept my word, then I can talk this up. But what you're hearing is actually, okay, now I need to think about how safe I am. What does this mean for me? What does it mean for other people? And so your sympathetic nervous system basically fires instead, which is the, sort of anxiety, cortisol. All right, do I need to get my CV ready? Do we need to just hunker down and be careful? What's going to happen here? And you don't get, and as soon as you do that, that is like a chemical blanket. You don't get any of that lovely, new, wonderful kind of neural dance that creates this beautiful kind of contagion. All you get is people, the brain actually alters and the effort goes into how do I maintain my safety? So you actually draw people even further into themselves than they were, not, further out. It has a really different cognitive effect. And when they walk out of that room, they will have heard and picked up completely different information. Even though they might have said something that's quite similar, it doesn't have the same impact, and the memory doesn't retain it the same way.
Correct. In the second example, people are starting to building walls around them to protect themselves rather than,
yes,
reaching a hand to create a bridge to the solution.
Exactly. Yep. And they can't even see it. They don't build that, because it hasn't started to happen. Respect is part of that, and the neuroscience of respect is fascinating. I think all of us have been in a position where, we might be around a table and there's going to be a change or something different, and in will come people to consult with us. And very quickly, we make a decision about whether they are or not, because part of our brain has really good systems of picking up truth, picking up whether or not the person's being honest. We're extremely well designed to do that. We know it quite quickly. And so if the person has actually come along and is interested and does want to listen, then again, similar thing happens. We start getting that lovely contagion. We start leaning in. We start, because what we start doing is saying, we start finding similarities with the person, how we sort of share positive things. It's almost like meeting a friend's friend. And off you go. You're getting in there and you're getting on with, right, what might this look like? Yes, I'm part of this. If that person comes in and within a very short space of time, we know perfectly well they've already made their decision and this is just ticking a box, then what the brain does is go, okay, so you don't respect me at all. So what I'm now going to do is find every piece of evidence that says you're wrong and that I do not want to do this with you. And so again, we filter out the things that make sense in going forward. We filter in all of the information that says, no, this is not right. And all you do is really wait for it to finish. So, and again, you have a very different idea of what's gone on. So the power of respect is massive in organizations. That beautiful sort of small, sort of the power of small actions. A lot of that is about if you're in a respectful environment where what you say matters and you're given agency to actually think and make a difference. Of course, we know it matters with mental, health. We know it matters in all kinds of ways, but it has a fascinating cognitive impact as well.
Yeah. Fiona, let's switch a bit to AI and human systems. You mentioned cognitive perspective. From a cognitive perspective, what changes when humans start delegating thinking to AI?
Right. We've got to think about the difference between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, basically. And I never meant to end up looking at kind of wet and dry neural networks, but that was in the end what part of the PhD was. And so if we think about, and I still wish we hadn't called it artificial intelligence, but if we think about AI, that it excels at particular types of logic, if you like. So it's very good at, rule-based tasks because the algorithm is the rule that sets the information parameters that the AI is going to work under. And it's very good at that. It's very good at routine tasks, pattern recognition. There's a bunch of stuff. I've built my own generative agent. I trained it. I mean, I certainly use it, but I don't ever, I'm very, very tight. The algorithm the question you ask acts like an algorithm. You've got to be very, very specific. And then you've got to know that it gets it wrong and it lies and all sorts of things. But it's also, it's wonderfully useful with those bits, as long as you know what you're doing. Humans, we are amazing at extrapolation, at jumping, at rule breaking. So that's one of the differences is humans rule break all the time. And then they start to get into abstraction. And that is taking, because we've got things encoded everywhere, the more complex or interesting the problem is, the more parts of the brain start to come in and collaborate. And then you get these really interesting sort of cross connections. And so there's a number of things that we really do need to keep doing. We also need to just routinize. There's different types of memory, and we need to routinize rote learning in some ways as well, of just getting information that is dull for the memory to get in there, but the pattern then becomes set. I'm old enough to have learnt my times tables, for example, by rote. I still know them off by heart because they're just in there as a sequence. So there's a number of things that if we delegate things to AI, we don't then chunk up that information, because what you do when you're looking at data, even if it's you're new and you're doing a lot of routine things, that still gives you cognitive resources to then be able to automatically not have to think about those things because they're already chunked up. And then you can start looking at the ambiguity, at the things that don't sit in there, the more complex things, the things that don't obey what the general rule is. And you pick that stuff up because you have more cognitive space to do it. And you have more chunked based knowledge on which to, with which to work. So whenever people hold up, for example, their phone and say to me, this is my memory now. No, it's not. It's really important that we learn, we dive, we absorb, we store, because our brain is extremely good at hugely efficiently keeping that information. And we then can connect that across to other information really quickly as needed. And so I guess what we end up with, I talk a lot with organisations about this, about what you don't delegate, the fact that people aren't chunking. And the problem that we've got is actually called the efficiency paradox now. So AI might well undermine the very kind of, learning it's supposed to be engendering, allowing you to have time to do, because the way that data chunking or information chunking for humans works is you have to get that in, you have to spend the time creating those cognitive chunks, which then become chunks and meta chunks. And the lovely thing about that is all of them, they have massive amounts of information in them, and they open in the real working memory all at once. So we have speed that is incredible. We still don't know how the brain works in so many ways, but we do know that we can absorb and we can extrapolate around all different types of data at the same time, you know, and we can then come up with ideas very fast that span context and levels of complexity and all kinds of things that are completely, we can navigate meaning, you know, we can do all of those things that AI has got a hope of doing. So, but we need to practice, and we need to have osmosis with people that we work with. We actually read that off people's kind of, you know, brains, muscles. We've got so much absorption that we can do. I probably went far too long there. Sorry.
No. I'm fascinating about what you're saying, and I think I could listen to you hours and hours. Um, really, technology amplifies structure, right?
Yes.
But it does not replace judgment.
No,
Um,
that's right. Yeah. The thing
so,
we've got to do is humans have to, we have to, we can automate like administrative and pattern recognition efficiency and all that kind of thing, but we have to maintain that human judgment, because all of the things around context and you know, those kinds of complexity, ambiguity, we can navigate ambiguity and all that sort of thing that that there's no way AI can do.
how, based on your experience and all the interactions that you have had with different companies, different clients, how might AI quickly strengthen the illusion of control for leaders?
Mm. Um, well, if you've, I think probably everyone by now has.
Oh, we lost you again. Now it's good. Now we hear you. Now you're back,
Oh,
Fiona.
good, great. Okay, so did you hear me
No.
before? Okay,
So,
so I think probably everyone's tried the generative AI probably by now. You know, they've either tried ChatGPT or they've tried Claude or something. And as we know, it's very fast. It's very articulate and it's very sure. And we could have a whole podcast on what it does really well, what it doesn't do at all, what it does terribly, how many mistakes it makes, what the kind of mistakes are, what you do. But the trouble for leaders is, especially the people that that are not expert and that are not really comfortable with, okay, but I might, you know, what again, just confirming information, you know, what am I missing, or what are you missing, or what about this? Then what you end up with then is that critique accuracy doesn't happen. And very often, if you have leaders who are comfortable with control, they look for information that reinforces what they already think. And the trouble is, so does AI. So AI will tell you what it thinks you want to hear.
mhm.
And if you build so I love my my agent, but I've spent a long time building that with all of my, you know, knowledge, hours, 1,000 days, and I can still say, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we, I don't know, how do we improve complex chunking in a preschool on this area? And we can get really far down the rabbit hole, and it will be saying, oh, this is fantastic, brand new paradigm, you're brilliant. You know, we do this and this and this. And I'll say, well, what about that being seen? It's never been done before. Well, what about this new, I don't know, this new research in Turkey? What, no, I haven't heard of that. Well, this is the title. Well, I don't know it. Well, here's the article. Think. Oh, this changes everything. and it's because you have to have the time, the expertise to bother doing that. The end product, you know, they're very, very good. You've really got to be that they don't save time in that way, and they're wrong a lot. So if you already like that control, then they will automatically feed you the information that you might ask for, which will just reinforce what you already want. So the problem then is it becomes almost an echo chamber. It's a little bit like, groupthink, but with an AI. Because it's a predictive word generator. That's what happens. It predicts each new word is what is, by prediction, the best new word to put in front of that word that we just had for you, and when I'm talking to you. It's not sitting back looking at the contextual logic of the world. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. But if you've got people who would rather dive into not knowing and the interesting, unusual, and really kind of, again, push the boundaries, then you can have great fun. And you also can end up with some really interesting, outcomes as
Outcomes.
well.
Yeah, acceleration without discernment rarely produces wisdom. So, if one cannot
Yes.
break his or her pattern and just get stuck, as you said, in control or another behavior, then you all get back the same thing.
Well, I'd like to go back to that sentence. That's a brilliant sentence, for all kinds of technical reasons as well. So if all you do, so right now I spend quite a lot of time debating with the organizations where someone has said, oh yeah, AI all the time for everyone and everything. We all have to get really used to using it and, go sort of down that road. Absolutely not. Discernment is critical to using any AI agent or tool well, because again, we have to be very discerning around what does it do, what doesn't it do, what do humans do really well, what do humans do well without AI getting in the way. I mean, I actually turn off things like, Copilot and AI assistants and all that. I completely get rid of them every time they're anywhere, because it stops me having that abstractive space to actually think or write what I want to. And I'm much more efficient if I can just think about it rather than have this constant, I want, can we help? No, go away. But at a higher level, we've got something called, it's been termed work slop. And what you end up getting is, it's used all the time. If it is used all the time and for the wrong things, then it will come back and generate something that isn't necessarily correct. And it does hallucinate. There are problems, about 4 or 5 things that are generally negative in the use of it, if you don't use it for what it's good for. So you kind of got 2 choices. You either then got the person has to sit and spend the time testing to see if it's right. And so that's when you're not more productive. Or it gets passed on, which is the term work slop, and the next person has to then spend the time trying to make, see whether it's right. And they're not too happy with the person that's just given them something that they then have to spend that time doing either. So it also has impacts on that whole kind of, trust social system. Or they don't do that and they pass it on. And then you end up with more and more inaccurate data in the system. And so I think I did a study of some of the really large government organizations that adopt everything for everywhere kind of attitude. And I think the stats for October 26 were that in those large organizations, there's a productivity cost of about $9 million a year. So it's not helping, it's negative.
Yeah.
Having said that, I can, we won't now, but there's ways to use it where you'll absolutely save a whole amount of, time, effort, program. There's wonderful things it does. But your sentence where you talked about just acceleration with no discernment is spot on.
Thank you. Fiona, we came to the end of our session. The time just flew. um, if you would give just one advice to the audience, to the leaders, what would be that one advice?
One advice. It would be understanding the amazing value of human intelligence and human interconnectivity. Because so often because it's there all the time, I think we take it for granted. We don't we don't figure in as well when it's really critical for people to connect, to spend time proximally together, to think together, to problem solve together, to bond, to do those things. And it's not just coming in to have fun and drink. It's coming in to do the really difficult, deep work where, again, you get this brain synchrony that speeds up beautiful, really sort of accurate problem solving processes. And there are ways to grow it. There are ways to set up that capacity for radar right through the organization. And you end up with people who are strategic all the way through. And you end up with an organization that can actually move really adaptively because you have capacity all the way through that organization, and trust and positivism that they get in and it's going to actually work, and they're going to be part of it, but they can do it, they can get on with it. And you end up, often I say that exceptional ideas come from questioning made safe, and resources wrapped around that. So building that radar, building that kind of high trust and radar in an organization, I've consistently seen improves the capacity for sort of not only flourishment in working in a really lovely organization, but also the capability to adapt in real time, and keep going, adapting in real time, so much more than the latest fad or the latest technology. That's the secret. Organizations are human. They're humans working together. So it shouldn't be starting with what can the latest tech do. It should be starting with how can humans best think and work together, and just diving into how incredible that kind of inter-team and inter-organizational synchrony can be. So yeah, that would be probably the one
Wonderful.
thing that I would use.
Wonderful, Fiona. Thank you very much. Thank you
You're
once
welcome.
again for accepting to be my guest speaker today. Thank you to everyone who joined us live on LinkedIn. And for our audience, remember the next session, stress, safety, connection, the neuroscience of leadership and people trust, with Alison French, Managing Director of Alto Solutions, will take place on the 26th of February from 6 to 7 p.m. Central European Time. Until then, stay curious, stay connected, and lead with purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you.